Hello, welcome to another video, and this is another one of our series on muscles, and we're going to look at the glutes, which I've looked at really on my YouTube channel, I reckon several hundreds of times, and various videos and things about it, just because there's so many problems around the pelvic and hip region. But if I'm going to, the biggest problem with this video is trying to narrow it down to a handful of exercises when there's really probably like 50 or 60 in my mind that I might look at, but maybe even more. But if I was to try and just give you a process of how I would go about strengthening the glutes, I'm going to start with, like I have with all the other videos, looking at mobility first. So I'm really looking at releasing stiffness through the posterior, through the glutes themselves. So this first is just a simple stretch. Now, again, there really is more than one. I could use so many variations of this to release the stiffness. So you've got to find what works for you. So I'm not saying this is the only one. I'm just saying that you really need to make sure that you have adequate mobility before you try to just go and annihilate your glutes with strength exercises, which is what most people do first. Always remember, a mobility restriction will inhibit your ability to really strengthen the muscles that you're looking for to their true potential, but most importantly, it eliminates compensation, which causes trouble. Now, in addition to stretch, sometimes I don't use stretching at all. Some people prefer like using foam rollers through, so again, there's many ways I might use this. And in some people I might do that around the lateral part of the muscle there, of the hip there, ITB, TFL. Other people it's working through the quadriceps like we're doing, like Mel's showing on this part. And other people it might be just working through the glutes itself, especially if they've got like a posterior tilt. A posterior tilt, by the way, is going to really ruin glute function, and it's going to really quickly put you in a position of either hip problems or low back problems or both. So you really got to try to make sure that you have really good mobility through that hip region before you attempt to just go straight to the strengthening stage. All right, so the combination of any of the things that I've shown there, plus go look in the links under the video here, because I'll give you articles that give you a lot more detail and other variations of these. Some mobility drills and stuff like that that I may use that are probably for some people more useful than just a stretcher or a foam roller. All right, now once I can sort of safely say that I've got adequate mobility so that I can get in good positions to move correctly, then I want to look at stabilizing, and just the basic hip extension drill, like in this case this one, with using two legs is not really going to achieve much, but this single leg one really does highlight potential problems that you're going to see when you try to go to the strengthening stage. So the way that this usually works is, and again I've featured this many times before, it's very simple, and that's also a really good why it's also a really good test, because there's really low skill level. So all I ask the person to do is come up to a basic hip extension with two legs, and what I'm looking for is several things, and I get Mel to do this 2 more times. On the next one is where we see her weak leg, I think from memory. So basically you come up with 2 legs, you hold that position there. She does a strong leg here, but what I'm looking for as I move the camera to the front is I'm looking to see if she maintains a square pelvis, and the leg that lifts up off the ground being this leg, if that hip drops to the floor as she attempts to lift the leg, then I know that there's a weakness on the side that's there. All right, so on this right leg, the glute must remain strong, but it must work in tandem with the abdominal on the other side to maintain a square level pelvis. If there's a compensation through here, either you'll see that obviously the pelvis tilt, but you also may see a hamstring cramp. Both of those are a dead giveaway that the glutes are unable to perform their role due to significant maybe mobility restriction or just faulty movement. Now in this case is where we get her to do, she does a good leg again, I ask her to do a bad one on the next one, but you get to see that she has a weakness on the left side, so that when she comes up, that's why she does the favoured one several. You can see how there if I just take that back, just as she attempts to lift the leg up, you'll see that shifting. So she's holding right here, and then as she goes to move, you'll see see how that real shift to the side, and this drops. If we kept going, she would get a hamstring cramp. All right, so we know that there's a definite weakness on the left side. If I see that on this simple exercise, I'm definitely going to see it on the big ones. All right, and it means that if I just go straight to the big ones, I'm going to force my body to find a way around the weakness, and that compensation that you force the body into is what leads to injury and pain. All right, so before you can just go and annihilate your glutes, you've got to really look at all these things, and then if you get stuck at certain points, that's where you stop, and you've got to work your way through it, and it could take some time. So the basic hip extension obviously looks at one function of the glutes being just the hip extension itself. This is where we're looking at the clam with the hip abduction. So in this abduction, you know, this is again where she's done her strong leg because the bad one wouldn't look too favourable. But I've done videos on this in the past, but common cheating on this is when the body tries to attempt to help out the hip because there's no strength to provide the abduction. So you'll see a lot of rocking and rolling of the upper body in an attempt to find the lost movement that you can't get from the glutes. I tend not to be a big fan of the clam. For some people it's great. For other people it really can cause a lot of trouble. Again, go check the description under below because I have detailed articles in that about why that's the case. I won't go into that here because otherwise we'll spend too much time on it. But it can be a useful exercise. It's just not for everyone. This next one, however, is a good one for everyone. Most people don't rate it as much of a glute exercise. If I wanted to really make it about strength, which remember at this point we're still in stability stage, if I wanted to make it about strength, I could add a cable to her foot and get her to push the resistance backwards. But the main point of using this exercise, because this again is the extension, but being in this unstable part with the opposite leg and arm, we're getting a lot more core work. All right, so that's the first thing. Obviously, the unstable nature of it all really brings in the core work, but even better than that is that we start to get to see how well her hip is moving, especially when it comes in. So when it comes in on this point here, that we'll see that posterior tilt with the person who has poor hip control. So usually the femur rolling too far forward out of the hip socket where it should be sort of sitting right in the middle there. All right, so we start to see these lumbar problems and posterior tilt, poor move. It could be nothing to do with hip mobility, just purely brain. So we get the added benefit of the core. We get to see how the hip truly functions. And remember, this movement, if I take that back, this movement of hip extension is the movement of hip extension in walking, where the hip extension on the floor with the bridge is like the hip extension of bending over to pick things up. They're both hip extension, but they're so different in their mechanics. All right, so you really need to look at these things with these simple exercises. And again, I could really put it up a notch by adding instability to it. I could add load to it to make it a strength exercise. A fantastic movement to really look at in the early stages to eliminate or to identify where compensation may be hiding that is not easy to detect in the bigger movements, because you've got things like the feet and that involved. So this is where we can really just look at the hip without the complication of ankle mobility, foot stability being involved. All right, so now I'm moving. So once I'm sort of getting out of that basic floor stability, very, very simple exercises. But, you know, for a lot of people, the hip dysfunction, which there's a hell of a lot of people like that, I might be stuck there for quite some time. Once I've worked my way through, I may not be perfect, but I'm getting to that point, and I must get to this point as soon as I can without cheating. I want to see how people are going to stand up and move. So I'll just look at a basic squat to begin with. Usually I'll look at the deadlift first, but the squat might reveal things, and you'll see exactly what I was looking for just there. So Mel cheated on this first one in a big way, and you can see this. And again, it's her left leg that is the main problem. All right, so we know there's a known weakness, and you see how that rolls in right there. Look at that left leg, not happy at all. All right, so just really drifted in. There was, because the band adding resistance is forcing the abduction while she's doing extension. So we're getting the clam and the hip extension joined together. So this is where she learns from her mistake and then tries to really incorporate a lot more strength into it this time. All right, so a lot more brain effort helps to engage the muscle, but there's still obviously some known weakness there. All right, so I could continue working with that, and obviously she does, and she's, it's a work in progress. I could also add in the side moving one of the crab walk. So for some people, this actually it's arguably easier, even though it looks more complicated, because the moving part of it helps them to really engage it. So you can see how she's actually executing this better than the standing still version. All right, so and you're obviously getting like a bit more load on the right moving to begin with, and now she's going to come back with her left. So it can really help them to learn how to move that hip correctly in abduction, external rotation, while simultaneously adding the extension to it. All right, so very useful exercise. Again, I could add load to make it more about the strength if I wanted to. There's an endless amount of ways. Usually I'll try to just work with higher repetitions. It's not really suitable for adding a huge barbell on top of. I could add dumbbells and stuff, but it's not really ideally the best way. Now, next thing we want to look at is the deadlift. Arguably, I probably would have done this before the crab walks, but I just used the other one because there was more body weight orientated. This is where we're probably moving more to strength, obviously because it's the first time we've added load. All right, so this first deadlift is obviously the Romanian deadlift. I could use a kettlebell, I could use a standard barbell, I could even use a dumbbell. It doesn't matter, but I want to really make sure that this person can understand how to get a full hip hinge with very little knee movement. So I don't really want a traditional trap bar or deadlift, or a traditional deadlift where the knees come forward a bit and it's almost a squatting type action. I'm not looking for her to do that. I want her to keep her shin as straight as possible so we get the full hip extension, and see how she's right over it. I'm obviously looking for that nice lumbar curve. Again, I've done so many videos and things on this before, but just because it's such a problematic movement, not an exercise, the movement of bending is just so problematic for people these days. They just really have so many issues around the hip. This exercise is a great correction for it, and is by far the best way to build strength and good mobility at the same time. The only thing that beats this is the single leg deadlift in terms of maximal strength, which we'll look at next. But this is really going to be the key for most people with hip-based problems or glute weakness. If they can really get the hang of deadlifts, they're a fair way forward in terms of what they're going to get. Where the squat we looked at before, there's a lot of quadriceps involved in that. Definitely a hip action, but the knee is involved quite heavily, so it can make things look good. So once we've got the traditional two-legged Romanian deadlift, I want to look at the single leg. You could do this body weight. A lot of people really struggle with the balance. That's why I often will use a ball just to assist them with the balance. I don't want to use a stick. I don't want to cheat on it so much that it'll remove all types of balance. I just want to make it a little bit easier for them. So again, the same action as what we just saw. We want to, where she probably a bit too much knee on that movement. We want to look at her more hip based. So you'll see this time, and see how that very straight shin. So it forces all of the hip action. This really takes the strength of the glutes right up to the max, just because it now has to contend with the alignment of abduction and of rolling in. It's working in tandem with the foot as well. This really is the king of the glute exercises. So if you really want to maximize the strength gains, you have to spend a lot of time with your single leg work. There's many versions. This is just one of several, but obviously it's the simplest one to begin with. So that's coming from the top down. If I do from the bottom up, which is more of a power type progression, so let's say we've got all our strength, I want to move into faster movements, which in all these muscle-based videos I've done so far, you'll always notice I always finish off with these fastings, because that's where much more severe problems, especially in sports, start to occur. So this is like a basic step up, but adding that Romanian deadlift positioning at the beginning. See how she sticks her hip out, and it looks very much like a running action. Really a massive amount of strength if we added dumbbells or barbell, just because she's starting at the weak point. It's really hard to build strength at this point. You know, it's much better to eccentrically lower and then explode up. Really hard to just do it from a stationary start. All right, but if I'm looking to build some maximal strength and power, this is something that I might use for certain people. And obviously the last thing I want to look at is all of the agility stuff, which we've looked at in nearly every video so far, to do with legs at least. So let's have a look at those. Okay, so the last thing is looking at the faster moving single leg stuff. Again, like there's so many, I'm just showing you one, but really I'd like to probably show you 20 or 30 of these different versions. All these exercises heavily rely on the glutes, and that's obviously why so many knee injuries, hip injuries, ankle injuries are related to glute dysfunction or weakness. So this is single leg hopping drill, so it looks very much like your single leg deadlift. And you see how she having to maintain perfect alignment of the hip, knee and ankle, and having to sit back in her hips. So see how she lands. If she lands vertical, like if she landed straight like she's about to, which it looks like she's going to, and then just heels drop and her knee comes forward, so she sits up like that, that's how you blow a knee out. And actually this girl did blow a knee out. And that's why she's learning this drill, to then learn how to sit back. See how she's sitting back, learning to get the hip control. All right. These are all great exercises that take the function and the strength of the glutes to its ultimate role of learning to engage quickly. Because if it's strong but it doesn't fire fast enough, it's no good to you. You really need to learn how to mobilize at the beginning, stabilize it, and get the true core and everything aligning correctly, then gradually build up your strength of various exercises, starting with 2 legs, starting with single leg, and then but eventually moving to these things, especially if you play sports. If you don't play sports, maybe not these exercises may not be needed, but if you do play sports, you really should be doing them. And even if you don't, I would say it's still good to practice them, because you really eliminate anything from becoming a big problem later on. All right, so like I said, this is just a process of how I would go about it. It's not the exact exercises. I'm just giving you a taste of what I may or may not use. So hopefully I'll give you some ideas. Again, check the description, because I'll give you a ton of information that you can check up with the extra stuff I've left out. All right, so I hope you enjoy that, and we'll see you on our next one.